I don't complain of their punishment. Let all women who have sinned be punished.
My dear young lady.
It is right that they should be punished, but don't let them be the only ones to suffer. If a man and woman have sinned, let them both go forth into the desert to love or loathe each other there. Let them both be branded. Don't have one law for men and another for women. Until you count what is a shame in a woman to be an infamy in a man, you will always be unjust. And right, that the pillar of fire, and wrong, that pillar of cloud, will be made dim to your eyes.
Oh, might I, dear Miss Worsley, as you're standing up, ask you for my thread, which is just behind you.
Oh, my dear Mrs. Arbuthnot, I'm so pleased you have come up, but I didn't hear you announce.
Oh, I came straight in from the terrace, Lady Huntston, just as I was.
Oh.
You didn't tell me you were having a party.
Oh, it's not a party. It's just a few guests who are staying in the house and whom you must know. Allow me. Caroline, this is Mrs. Arbuthnot, one of my sweetest friends, Lady Caroline Pomfret.
How do you do?
Lady Stutfield, Mrs. Allenby, and this is my young American friend, Miss Worsley, who's just been telling us all how wicked we are.
I'm afraid you think I spoke too strongly, Lady Huntston, but there are some things in England.
Oh, my dear young lady, there was a great deal of truth, I dare say, in what you said. And you looked very pretty when you said it, and that's much more important. The only point where I thought you were a little hard was about poor Lady Caroline's brother, poor Lord Henry. He really is such good company. Take Mrs. Arbuthnot's things.
Lady Caroline, I had no idea it was your brother. I'm sorry for the pain it must have caused
Miss
you.
Worsley, the only part of your little speech, if I may so term it, with which I thoroughly agreed, was the part about my brother. Nothing you could possibly say could be too bad for him. I regard Henry as infamous, absolutely infamous. But I am bound to state that, as you were remarking, Jane, he is excellent company, and he is one of the best cooks in London, and after a good dinner, one can forgive anybody, even one's own relations.
Now do come, dear, and make friends with Mrs. Arbuthnot. Now she is one of the good, sweet, simple people that you told us we never admitted into society.
What a bore it is, the men staying so long after dinner. I expect they're saying the most dreadful things about us.
Oh, do you really think so?
I was sure of it.
Oh, how very, very horrid of them.
Oh, I wish to goodness they would come.
Oh, shall we go out onto the terrace?
Oh, anything to get away from the dowagers and the dowdies. We're going to look at the stars, Lady Huntston.
Oh, you will find a great many, dear, a great many. Don't catch cold. Miss Worsley and Gerald are fast friends, Mrs. Arbuthnot.
Your son has been very kind to me during my stay here.
Yes, he's spoken to me about you several times. He's so pleased to have had the honour of meeting you.
Oh, we're all going to miss Gerald so much, dear Mrs. Arbuthnot.
Has Lord Illingworth really offered to make Gerald his secretary?
Oh, yes, and he's been most charming about it. He has the highest possible opinion of your boy. You don't know Lord Illingworth, I believe, dear.
No, I've never met him.
But you know of him by name, no doubt.
No, I'm afraid I don't. I live so much out of the world and see so few people. I remember hearing about an old Lord Illingworth who lived in Yorkshire, I think.
Oh, that would be the last Earl but one. He was a very curious man. Wanted to marry beneath him, or wouldn't, I believe. No, there was some scandal about it. The present Lord Illingworth is quite different. He's very distinguished, and he is comparatively a young man still, and only came to his title within, how long exactly is it, Caroline, since Lord Illingworth succeeded?
About 4 years, I think, Jane. I know it was the same year my brother had his last exposure in the evening newspapers.
Oh, yes, I remember. Yes, that would be about 4 years. Of course, there were a great many people between the present Lord Illingworth and the title, Mrs. Arbuthnot. there was some... No, who was there, Caroline?
There was poor Margaret's baby. You remember how anxious she was to have a boy, and it was a boy, but it died. And her husband died shortly afterwards, and she married almost immediately one of Ascot's sons, who, I'm told, beats her.
Oh, that's in the family, dear. That's in the family. And there was also, I remember, a clergyman who wanted to be a lunatic, or a lunatic who wanted to be a clergyman. But I know the Court of Chancery investigated the matter and decided he was quite sane. And I saw him afterwards at poor Lord Plumstead with straws in his hair. There was something very odd about him. I can't recall what. Oh, I often regret, Caroline, that dear Lady Cecilia never lived to see her son get the title.
Lady Cecilia?
Lord Illingworth's mother, dear Mrs. Arbuthnot. She married Sir Thomas Harford, who wasn't considered a very good match for her at the time. I knew them all quite intimately, and both the sons, Arthur and George.
It was the eldest son who succeeded, of course, Lady Hunsdon.
No, dear. He was killed in the hunting field. Or was it fishing, Caroline?
No.
I forget, yeah.
No.
And George came in for everything. I always tell him, no younger son has ever had such good luck as he has had.
Lady Hunsdon, I'd like to speak to Gerald at once. Might I see him? Could he be sent for?
Oh, certainly, dear. I will send one of the servants into the dining room to fetch him. I don't know what keeps the gentleman so long.
I hope Sir John has not been drinking port. It is excessively bad for him.
I don't think it'll do him any harm, Caroline.
Sir John is very delicate. He requires to be carefully watched.
You spoil him, Caroline, you do indeed. When I first knew Lord Illingworth as playing George Harford, he was simply a very brilliant young man about town, with not a penny of money except what poor dear Lady Cecilia gave to him. She was devoted to him, chiefly, I fancy, because he was on bad terms with his father. Here's the dear Archdeacon. No, it doesn't.
Lord Illingworth has been most entertaining. I've never enjoyed myself more. Mrs. Arbuthnot.
You see, I have got Mrs. Arbuthnot to come to me at last.
That is a great honour, Lady Hunsdon. Mrs. Daubeny will be quite jealous of you.
Oh, I'm so sorry Mrs. Daubeny could not come with you tonight.
Yeah.
Headache, as usual, I suppose.
Yes, Lady Hunsdon, a perfect martyr. But she's happiest alone. She's happiest alone.
John?
Yes, my love.
How is the most charming woman in the world?
Oh, we are both quite well, thank you, Lord Illingworth. But what a short time you've been in the dining room. It seems as if we'd only just left. You might have waited for another cigarette.
I was bored to death. Never opened my lips the whole time. Absolutely longing to come into you.
Oh, you should have. The American girl has been giving us a lecture.
Really? All Americans lecture, I believe. Must be the climate. What was she lecturing about?
Puritanism, of course.
I am going to convert her, am I not? How long do you give me?
A week.
A week is more than enough.
I don't think so.
Dear Mother!
Gerald. I don't feel at all well. Gerald, see me home. I shouldn't have come.
I'm so sorry, Mother, certainly. But you must know Lord Illingworth first.
No, not tonight, Gerald.
Oh, do speak to him for a moment. This is so important for me. Lord Illingworth, I want you so much to know my mother.
With the greatest pleasure. Be back in a moment. People's mothers always bore me to death. All women become like their mothers. That is their tragedy.
No man does. That is his.
What a delightful mood you're in this evening.
Mother, this is Lord Illingworth, who has offered to take me as his private secretary. It is a wonderful opening for me, isn't it? I hope he won't be disappointed in me, that is all. You'll thank Lord Illingworth, Mother, won't you?
Lord Illingworth is very good, I'm sure, to interest himself in you for the moment.
Oh, Gerald and I are great friends already, Mrs. Arbuthnot.
There can be nothing in common between you and my son, Lord Illingworth.
Dear Mother, how can you say so? Of course, Lord Illingworth is awfully clever and that sort of thing. There is nothing Lord Illingworth doesn't know.
My dear boy.
He knows more about life than anyone I have ever met. He's been awfully good to me, Mother. No one has ever been so good.
Lord Illingworth may change his mind. He may not really want you as his secretary.
Mother, why do you say that?
But you must remember you've had so few advantages.
Lord Illingworth, I need to speak to you. Do come over.
Will you excuse me, Mrs. Arbuthnot? Now, Gerald, don't let your charming mother make any more difficulties. The thing is quite settled, isn't it?
I hope so.
What is the attraction saints always have for sinners? I thought you'd never leave the lady in black velvet.
She is excessively handsome.
Caroline, should we make a move to the music room? Miss Worsley is going to play.
Cock-a-doodle-doo.
Oh, you'll come too, won't you, dear Mrs. Arbuthnot? Oh, I really must take Miss Worsley down some afternoon to the rectory. I should so like Mrs. Daubney to hear her on the violin. Oh, I forgot. Mrs. Daubney's hearing is a little defective, is it not?
Her deafness is a great privation to her. She can't even hear my sermons now. She reads them at home, but she has many resources in herself. Many resources.
She reads a great deal, I suppose.
Just the very largest print. The eyesight is rapidly going, but she's never morbid. Never morbid.
Please go through.
Do speak to my mother, Lord Illingworth, before you go into the music room. She seems to think somehow you don't mean what you said to me.
Please go. Keep an eye on him.
Aren't you coming?
In a few moments.
Through here.
Lady Hunston, if Mrs. Arbuthnot will allow me, I would like to say a few words to her, and we will join you later on.
Oh, yes, of course. You will have a great deal to say to her, and she will have a great deal to thank you for. It is not every son that gets such an offer, Mrs. Arbuthnot, but I know you appreciate that, dear.
Yes, my love.
Now, don't keep Mrs. Arbuthnot too long, Lord Illingworth. We can't spare her. And don't say any of your clever things to her. She doesn't know any of the wickedness of the world.
So that is our son, Rachel. Well, I'm very proud of him. He is a Harford, every inch of him. By the way, why Arbuthnot, Rachel?
One name is as good as another, when one has no right to any name.
I suppose so. But why Gerald?
After a man whose heart I broke, after my father.
And why Rockley?
Well, I had hoped that in a little English village I would not meet anyone who'd ever known me.
Well, Rachel, what is over is over. I'm very, very pleased with our son. It's a curious thing, Rachel. My life seemed to be quite complete. It was not so. It lacked something. It lacked a son. I have found my son now. I'm glad I found him.
You have no right to claim him or the smallest part of him. The boy's entirely mine and shall remain mine.
My dear Rachel, you have had him to yourself for over 20 years. Why not let me have him a little now? He is quite as much mine as yours.
You talking of the child you abandoned? The child who, as far as you're concerned, might have died of hunger and of want.
You forget, Rachel, it was you who left me. It was not I who left you.
I left you because you refused to give the child a name. Before my son was born, I implored you to marry me. You refused.
That was my mother's doing, Rachel. She said it would be perfect madness. I had no expectations then. And besides, I wasn't much older than you were. I was only 22. I was 21, I believe, when the whole thing began in your father's garden.
Well, when a man is old enough to do wrong, he should be old enough to do right also.
My dear Rachel, to say I left our child to starve is untrue and silly. My mother offered you 600 a year, but you wouldn't take anything. You simply disappeared and carried the child away with you.
I wouldn't have accepted a penny from her. Your father was different. He told you in my presence when we were in Paris it was your duty to marry me.
Oh, duty is what one expects from others. It is not what one does oneself.
Your father was an English gentleman!
Yes, and my mother was an English lady. I was influenced by her. Every man is when he is young.
I'm glad to hear you say so. Gerald shall certainly not go away with you.
Oh, what nonsense, Rachel.
Do you think I would allow my son?
Our son?
My son! To go away with the man who ruined my life. You don't realise what my past has been in suffering and in shame.
My dear Rachel, I think Gerald's future considerably more important than your past.
Gerald cannot separate his future from my past.
But that is exactly what he should do. Don't let us have a scene. Rachel, I want you to look at this matter from the common sense point of view. What is our son at present? What is his occupation? Sitting behind a ledger in a small provincial bank from 10 till 4. What are his pleasures? A tea party at the rectory once a month? Cricket on a Sunday afternoon? Dinner with the village doctor who drinks too much. If you imagine that Gerald is quite happy in such a position, you are mistaken. He is thoroughly discontented.
Well, he was not discontented till he met you. You have made him so.
Of course I made him so. Discontent is the first step in the progress of a man or a nation. But I did not leave him with a mere longing for things he could not get. No, I made him a charming offer. He jumped at it. Any young man would. And now, simply because it turns out that I am the boy's own father and he my own son, you propose practically to ruin his career.
I will not allow him to go.
You absolutely refuse?
Yes.
Because you have had what is called a painful past, you debar him from having a brilliant future. It comes to that.
I will not allow him to go!
But how can you prevent it? What excuse can you give to him for making him decline such an offer? I will not tell him in what relations I stand to him, I need hardly say. But you daren't tell him. You know that. Look how you've brought him up.
I've brought him up to be a good man.
Quite so. And what is the result? You have educated him to be your judge if he ever finds you out. And a bitter judge he will be to you. Don't be deceived, Rachel. Children begin by loving their parents. After a time, they judge them. Rarely, if ever, do they forgive them.
George, don't take my son away from me. I've had 20 years of sorrow. And I've only had one thing to love me, only one thing to love. You've had a life of joy, of pleasure and success. Don't come now and rob me of all I have in the whole world. You're so rich in other things. Leave me the little vineyard of my life. Leave me the walled-in garden and the well of water. The ewe lamb God sent me in pity or in wrath. Leave me that. George, don't take Gerald from me.
Rachel, at the present moment, you are not necessary to Gerald's career. I am. There is no more to be said on the subject.
I will not let him go.
Why, here is Gerald. He has the right to decide for himself.
Well, dear mother, I hope you have settled it all with Lord Illingworth.
I have not, Gerald.
Your mother seems not to like you coming with me for some reason.
Why, mother? You know I've set my heart on going.
Well, and I had hoped you were quite happy here with me, Gerald. I did not know you were so anxious to leave me.
Dear mother, how can you talk like that? Of course I've been quite happy with you. But a man can't stay always with his mother. No chap does. I want to make myself a position to do something. I thought you would have been proud to see me Lord Illingworth's secretary.
I do not think you'd be suitable to be a secretary to Lord Illingworth. You have no qualifications.
I don't wish to interfere for a moment, Mrs. Arbuthnot, but as far as your last objection is concerned, I surely am the best judge. Your son has all the qualifications I had hoped for. He has more, in fact, than I had even thought of. Far more. Have you some other reason, Mrs. Arbuthnot, why you don't wish your son to accept this post?
Have you, mother? Do answer.
If you have, pray say it. We are quite by ourselves here. Whatever it is, I will not repeat it.
Mother.
If you would like to be alone with your son, I will leave you. You may have some other reason that you don't wish me to hear.
I have no other reason.
Then, my dear boy, we may look upon the matter as settled. Come, you and I will smoke a cigarette together on the terrace. And, Mrs. Arbuthnot, pray, let me tell you, I think you have acted very, very wisely.